couple more topics that I'd like to cover in this study. You'll remember over the last 2.5 weeks, we finished it last Sunday morning, we talked a lot about putting on Christ as a garment. We talked about Jesus, our righteousness, that indeed from the book of Genesis through the book of Revelation, we are given scriptural passages, stories, or parables that taught us that indeed Jesus is our righteousness and that we must put on him as a robe of righteousness, that we must trust in the righteousness of Jesus Christ and not in our own righteousness. So this morning we're going to talk about a lesson that I am going to entitle Faith Righteousness. Actually, that's a term that we'll probably use as we go through, as we cover this particular topic, just as a matter of convenience, just as a matter of simplification. What we're really going to talk about is a biblical passage, the righteousness which is of God by faith. It's an important biblical expression. There are many New Testament references to this, to the righteousness which is of God by faith, or a similar expression. And actually, there are at least 9 New Testament passages which include this phrase, or again, a phrase that is very similar to it, a phrase that presents the same concept. 8 are written by the Apostle Paul, the great writer we've referred to many times on the doctrine of justification, and 1 is from the book of Hebrews. Again, we're going to use these passages and try to study them out and study them thoroughly if we can. They will again tell us more about what we're trying to discern in this study, the basis for our justification, the grounds for our justification, how it is that we have our justification, our redemption, our salvation, how it is that God accomplished this, and indeed it is God that accomplished it. What I'd like to do is read these passages. You're going to see them on the screen up here, okay? So we're going to read these 9 passages, and then we're going to try to study them in more detail. They have much to tell us. When we read the word righteousness here, I'd like to say again, righteousness here is used in the sense of redemptive righteousness or justification. It's not used here in the sense of right doing or moral and ethical living. So let's read the passages, first of all, and then we'll go back, as I said, and study them in more detail. All right, one passage comes from Hebrews 11, verse 7. And again, once more, you'll notice this phrase, the righteousness which is of God by faith, or again, something similar to that, something that relates the same thing. Hebrews 11, verse 7 says, Noah became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. In Romans 3 and verse 22, Paul says this, but it is the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all those who believe. In Romans 4 and verse 13, by the way, you'll see, again, most of these passages come from the book of Romans. One from the book of Philippians, one from Hebrews, but most from the book of Romans. We want to understand that the book of Romans is Paul's great dissertation on the doctrine of justification. Romans 4 and verse 13, Paul wrote that the promise was not through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. In Romans 9 and verse 32, Paul asked this question, why did Israel fail to attain unto the law of righteousness? And he says in that verse, because they did not pursue it by faith. In that same passage, in Romans 9 and verse 30, he says that Gentiles attain to righteousness, the righteousness which is by faith. In Romans 10 and verse 4, Paul says this, for Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes, to everyone who has faith. Righteousness by faith, the same concept. He continues on in Romans 10 and verse 6 and says this, but the righteousness based on faith speaks as follows. We're going to find that that's very interesting. I find it very interesting when we get to that passage and read the entire passage. It says something very interesting that we just read, that the righteousness based on faith speaks. It speaks. It has something to say. It has something to teach. It has something to instruct us about. I think that is an interesting way to say it. In Romans 10 and verse 10, Paul says, "For with the heart a person believes," that's faith, resulting in what we're talking about, righteousness. And then Philippians 3 and verse 9, Paul talking about himself, says this, "Not having a righteousness of my own derived from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ, the righteousness which comes from God on the basis of faith." So as I said, we will begin to look at these passages now in more detail. Those are, I said when I said there were at least 9 passages in the New Testament like this, and after I had the 9, I read a couple more passages. They were kind of similar too, so that's why I say at least 9. There actually may be more that kind of give this concept. But before we do, I think we need to ask ourselves a couple of questions before we consider these verses in more detail. Again, we just read 9 passages that in one way or another talk about the righteousness of God through faith, okay? So, I would ask you these things that I think we need to think about. If a particular phrase is used 9 times in the New Testament, at least 9 times, would we not consider that we need to study that particular phrase carefully? Would it not make sense that if a Bible writer, again, 8 of them come from the Apostle Paul, 1 from the writer of the book of Hebrews, that a biblical writer writing by inspiration of the Holy Spirit says something 9 times, would we not consider that that's pretty important? It must be important. We need to think about it carefully. Would we not think that the Holy Spirit has something He wants us to learn and understand regarding this phrase, regarding this concept? Would we not consider that the teaching is important, even critical? Okay? I believe that we would have to include these things. Once more, if the Bible tells us about this that many times, it seems to me that it's something important, that it's something that we should take in, that it's something we should study in detail. And I'll remind you again that the teaching is about the foundation of our justification, the foundation for our salvation. So, let's see what we can glean from these passages. First of all, if you would turn to the book of Hebrews, Hebrews 11 and verse 7. We'll go back to the first passage we're going to consider here. Again, about Noah. Hebrews 11 and verse 7. This reminds me, I'm looking over the audience now. I don't know exactly how many, but it reminds me that a number of our seniors just came from, was that Lancaster, Pennsylvania? Was that where it was? Okay, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, for the play. What was the name of the play? Noah? What was it? The name of the play was Noah. Obviously about Noah and the ark, okay? So talking about Noah here. All right, let's read in its entirety Hebrews 11 and verse 7. And again, I'm reading from the NASB. By faith, Noah, it says. By faith, Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence, prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world, and here's our phrase, and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. Okay, I have to stop here. Should we not do something about this? Should we not do something about the preacher and his wife walking in 5 minutes late here? Should we not, huh?
You're in the front row.
You're getting applause for walking in 5 minutes late, okay?
Well, they came.
Huh?
They did come.
Exactly, they came. At least they got here. That's right. Not only that, they made an entrance. Okay? All right. Okay. I want you to... Now, Josh doesn't mind this a bit, but Tricia is just embarrassed to death or whatever, okay? All right. Hebrews 11, verse 7. Noah became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. You know, what name sometimes do we give to the 11th chapter of the book of Hebrews? What name do we give often in my years in the church? We have given this name to the... Excuse me? Yes, the great faith chapter of the Bible, okay? Why do we call it that? Yeah, it talks about all of these persons of faith. I was trying to remember on the way here this morning. It talks about men, I think, and women. Does it mention some women? Does it mention Rahab? Is Rahab in there? I'm trying to remember. Okay, so Rahab's in the 11th chapter. So it talks about men and women of faith, okay? And the things that they did by faith. So again, has been referred to through the years as the great faith chapter of the Bible. Interestingly enough, though, I think that the chapter should probably begin earlier than 11 and verse 1. I think it probably should begin way back at chapter 10 and verse 38. You know, we must remember, one of the things we want to remind ourselves about is that the original scriptures did not have chapter and verse designations. The chapter and verse designations were added later for convenience sake. So a teacher like me or a preacher like Josh or someone else could say, turn to Hebrews 11, verse 13, or turn to Leviticus 12, verse 22, so we could find those things, okay? But again, we must remind ourselves from time to time that the chapter and verse designations were not in the original manuscripts, all right? So I think really the chapter maybe should begin back at chapter 10 and verse 38. Let's go back and read that. 10 and verse 38, and we'll read 38 and 39. But my righteous one will live by faith, and if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not among those who shrink back to destruction, but of those who have faith for the safekeeping of the soul. What we're talking about this morning, righteousness by faith. 10:38 says, my righteous one will live by faith, okay? Interestingly enough, here, the NASB, the ESV, and the NIV all say, my righteous one shall live by faith. But the King James and the New King James all say, the just shall live by faith, giving us indication again that the words just and righteous, we've said this in our study several times, are from the same Greek word, just as the word justification and righteousness are from the same Greek word. And so we have to be careful with the context and see what it's talking about and exactly what that particular word righteousness means in the particular context. But again, back to 10 and 38, but my righteous one will live by faith. I'm going to make this next statement. I took it from one of the commentaries I'm using. And in that commentary, the gospel preacher says, faith is the motivating factor behind all that we do before God. Faith is the motivating factor behind all we do before God. What do you think? You think that's true? Is faith the motivating factor behind all we do before God? Nod yes, shake your head no, whatever. Huh? Should be. Okay? Absolutely. I think it has to be. Think for a minute. Just think about why would we obey God at all if we did not have faith? Okay? If we did not have faith that He is God. Okay? If we did not have faith that He is the Creator. Okay? That He is the Creator of all the world, of the universe and all of that. That He is the Creator of you and I. That He's the Creator of mankind. Why would we be obedient to God if we did, and why would we call ourselves Christians if we did not have faith that God sent His Son here, Jesus Christ, okay, all right, to do the things that He did? Without faith, none of this means anything, okay? Got a couple hands. Brian.
Faith, we demonstrate our confidence in God.
Okay.
Just like Abraham obeyed and went.
Right.
Because of the promise that God gave him. We have confidence in God that he keeps his promise.
Okay.
If we truly have confidence in God in keeping his promise, there's nothing in this world we fear because God promises overcome all.
Yeah, yeah.
So it shows our confidence in the Lord.
Okay.
We resist and have lack of faith because we're not showing enough confidence in God.
All right. Confidence. Maybe a similar word to faith, if you will. Okay. All right. Maybe it doesn't mean the same thing, but similar. Larry.
I was just thinking, in today's, compared to when this was written, when Thomas doubted and Jesus came to him and he said, how blessed will those be that without
Who have not seen. Yeah.
So how, I think sometimes we need to give ourselves faith when we meet ourselves.
Okay.
We do believe based on faith. That faith continues to grow as we continue to read and study around each other, which is why when we do communion, I believe that should be the central part. And we should really honor that moment that we are communing with God.
Yeah.
What Christ did
Yeah.
for us. He died for us, the way he died for us. And sometimes it's hard for us to comprehend that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard for us to show the faith. Because we don't understand it to the depth, but as we continue to
Yeah.
grow, things happen.
Yeah, it reminds me of the passage, and again, I'm not going to. Maybe somebody can help me. The Zach person was the person who went to God and he wanted him to heal his son, if I remember the story correctly, and he went to Jesus rather. And Jesus said, "If you believe, this will happen." And he said, "I'm trying to remember who it was, and I can't." All right, he says, "Lord, I believe. Help thou my unbelief." Okay, have you ever prayed that, brother? I've prayed it. Okay. All right. Because I know I believe, but sometimes I need help with my unbelief. Okay. All right. For the strengthening of my faith. All right. And by the way, I really like all that both of you said, but I really like, Larry, you said that our faith grows from time to time, and you said over time, and you said that our faith grows from being in situations just like this. Absolutely. Our faith grows by being together. All right. And studying the Word of God. All right? Okay? So that's one of the importance of being in studies just like this, because the more we know about our God, the more we know about the Scriptures, I truly believe the more our faith will grow. But anyway, faith is the motivating factor behind all that we do before God. All right? My righteous one will live by faith. Verse 38 says, that is similar, I think, to the righteousness which is of God by faith, which again is what we're studying this morning, okay? I find verse 39 very interesting. But we are not among those who shrink back to destruction, but of those who have faith. For what purpose? According to your translation, somebody read, for those who have faith for what? Well, I can't hear you, I apologize. For faith, for the safekeeping of the soul, is what the NASB says, okay? Faith for safekeeping, the safekeeping of our soul, okay? I have it. Other translations say those who believe to the saving of the soul, okay? All right. Noah became an heir of the righteousness which was by faith, okay? Was Noah righteous, that is justified? That's the sense of righteousness here. Was Noah justified by perfectly keeping every command and precept of God? Was he? Was Noah justified by perfectly keeping every command and precept of God? Okay. Okay. All right. What do we read about Noah? Huh? Well, I think that was Moses. Okay. That's okay. That's okay. All right. Moses wasn't perfect either. Moses doesn't perfectly keep every command and precept of God. Okay. What did Noah do? We have a story about Noah that's not a very attractive story. What's the story in the Bible about Noah? That's not an attractive story. This one's a good story. He got drunk. Okay. And was laying on the bed naked, okay? All right, not a good thing, all right? So I'm going to ask you again. You don't have to answer. You can nod your head or you can just think about it, okay? Was Noah righteous for keeping perfectly every command and precept of God? Was Noah righteous because he was a perfect man? No. And again, that's kind of part of what we're studying in this study. He was heir of something. By the way, that story is in Genesis 9, okay? The story of Noah and his drunkenness, okay? The passage says he was an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. What's an heir? What's an heir? What if I told you I was an heir of, trying to think of somebody I'd like to be an heir of. The one that comes to mind, I'm not sure I'd like to be an heir particularly of him. But what if I told you I was an heir of Bill Gates' wealth? What would that mean? Yeah, I'm going to get it when he dies. Okay, all right, okay. And Bill has a lot of wealth, all right. Not sure I want to inherit everything that Bill has, but Bill has a lot of wealth, okay. So again, what is an heir? An heir is someone who receives something from another as an inheritance, okay. And in this case, Noah was an heir of the righteousness, which is by faith, all right. We are an heir of the righteousness which is by faith. We receive something from another. We receive righteousness or justification from God based upon our faith in the atoning sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Okay? You know, there's something else being taught here, however, though. By faith, what did Noah do? By faith, what did Noah do? Excuse me? He built an ark, okay? He took action. He followed the commandments of God. The Bible does not know of any conflict between saying, by faith, Noah built an ark, and he became an heir of the righteousness, which is by faith. These are perfectly compatible in Scripture. Biblical faith always obeys God. Biblical faith always works. Okay? And interestingly enough, we see this throughout the 11th chapter of the book of Hebrews. You guys know that. But just notice a few passages, okay, about by faith someone taking action. 11 and verse 4, by faith Abel offered to God a better sacrifice. We've already talked about Abraham, or Brian did. By faith, in verse 8, by faith Abraham, when he was called, obeyed, okay? Verse 9, by faith he lived as a stranger in the land of promise. Down in verse 17, by faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. He did what God asked him to do. He took action. In verse 24, by faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Further about Moses in 27, by faith he left Egypt. He took action. He did what he was told to do. In verse 28, by faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood. Verse 39, speaking of all those spoken of in the 11th chapter of the book, Hebrews says this, and all these, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised, because God had provided something better for us, so that apart from us, they would not be made perfect. Interesting. The Scriptures talk a lot about those in the Old Testament times, looking forward to something, but not knowing totally or exactly what that something was, as we have the opportunity to know today, because we know that Christ has come, okay? Also interesting to know what is said in verse 40 here, because God had provided something better for us. The entire book of Hebrews is about something being better or superior, that we in the Christian age have a better covenant founded on better promises with a better high priest. All right, that's kind of much of what the book of Hebrews is about. Yeah, Brian.
Can you imagine Noah having faith and no action? It would have led to his destruction.
Okay, would have led to the whole world's destruction. Okay, everybody. Even 8 wouldn't have been left, okay? Yeah.
Exactly. So faith without obedience is going to lead to one of the same things everybody else.
Okay, all right, yeah, okay. Without his action, well, it wouldn't have worked without his action, okay? All right, So that's, yes, sir.
The passage that appears to be quoted here in Hebrews 10:38 is from Habakkuk 2,
Yeah,
which points out, it says, "Behold, his soul is puffed up. Is it not upright within him? But the righteous shall live by faith." It's contrasting somebody who lives by faith by somebody who is claiming to be righteous by their own works.
okay, all right.
Arrogant, conceited, puffed up because of what they've done.
All right. I think we should look at that. Thank you, Josh. I didn't realize the earlier parts of that verse. Go back to the Old Testament a second. Josh is telling us about where Hebrews 10:38 is quoted from. Go back to Habakkuk just a second. I think Josh just made an excellent point. So let's see if we can get back there and find that. Where's Matt? I need his memory of the Old Testament books. Habakkuk. Habakkuk in my Bible is on page 1433. I'm not sure if that'll help y'all any enough. So let me go to 1433 and I can find Habakkuk, okay? It's really an excellent point here that Josh makes. He refers us to Habakkuk 2 and verse 4. Habakkuk 2 and verse 4. And interestingly enough, I knew the latter part of the verse. I knew that the latter part of Habakkuk 2 and verse 4 was what was quoted from in Hebrews 10 and 38. But I had not ever recognized what Josh just pointed out to me, the first part of the verse. Habakkuk 2 and verse 4. Let's read it. "Behold, as for the impudent one," and what does your translation say, Josh? As for the puffed up one. "Behold, as for the puffed up one, his soul is not right within him, but the righteous one will live by faith." Thank you, Josh. Boy, does that not tie in with all we've talked about in this study? Okay? That we can't be prideful, that we can't be puffed up, that we can't think it's because of our own merit, our own efforts, our own works, that we are justified, that by those things we're going to have our salvation, that by those things we're going to get to heaven. The passage contrasts the prideful person who says that his soul is not right with him. Rather, the righteous one will live by faith. Thank you, Josh. Was not aware of the early part of that verse. And I'd like to suggest to you one more time, that's the point of continued Bible study. I don't know about you, but I just found out something that I didn't know was there before. Again, I'm going to tell you again because I've said in many Bible classes and many sermons taught by good people and so forth and knowledgeable that I knew that the verse quoted in Hebrews 10:38 came from Habakkuk 2 and verse 4, but I didn't know about the first part of that verse, contrasting merit against faith. All right? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Years ago, I had a friend, whatever, and I asked them, I said, "Do you have any faith?" They said, "Yes." I said, "Well, live it."
Okay.
Because faith is a deep belief in the Lord, and you live it.
Okay.
But they just go by works. They don't go by really deep belief. You know?
Right,
And you've got
right.
to have that deep belief because that's what faith is.
Amen. Okay.
Thank you.
Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Hebrews 11:1 tells us. Okay. All right. Okay. And faith does motivate us to do the things we're supposed to do, as we just said. Okay. We need to move on here a little bit. Okay. Let's go to Romans chapter 9. And see if we have time enough to get through this passage this morning. Romans 9. We're going to consider a rather long passage here. but remarkably important and instructive passage in understanding the foundation of our redemption or justification, okay? About how we can attain to righteousness. Again, if you're in Romans chapter 9, we're going to read Romans 9, verse 30, and continue through chapter 10 and verse 10. Again, a long passage. You're going to see in this passage, this phrase we're talking about this morning, the righteousness which is through faith, used over and over again. But let's read this passage, and then we're going to try to take it apart a little bit. Romans 9, beginning in verse 30. What shall we say then? That Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness attained righteousness, but the righteousness that is by faith. There's our phrase. However, Israel, pursuing a law of righteousness, did not arrive at that law. Why? Because they did not pursue it by faith, but as though they could by works. They stumbled over the stumbling stone, just as it is written, Behold, I am laying in Zion a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, and the one who believes in him will not be put to shame. Brethren, my heart's desire and my prayer to God for them is for their salvation. For I testify about them, he's speaking of the Jews, that they have a zeal for God, but not according with knowledge. For not knowing about God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own, they did not subject themselves to the righteousness of God. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. For Moses writes of the righteousness that is based on the law, that the person who performs them will live by them. But the righteousness based on faith, there's our phrase again, but the righteousness based on faith speaks as follows. I've already indicated this morning. If I can repeat one more time, that's a remarkable statement that right there. The righteousness based on faith speaks. It has something to tell us. It has something it wants to say to us. It has something it wants to teach us. But the righteousness based on faith speaks as follows. Do not say in your heart, who will go up into heaven? That is to bring Christ down. Or who will descend into the abyss? That is to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith which we are preaching. That if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For with the heart a person believes, resulting in righteousness, and with the mouth he confesses, resulting in salvation. Remarkable passage. Let's dive into it a little bit. Paul says here that the Gentiles attained into righteousness, that is justification, but the Jews did not. Why? Why did the Gentiles attain righteousness, but the Jews did not, according to the passage? Can you tell me what it says? Look in verses 30 and 31. All right, and tell me why the Gentiles attained into righteousness, but the Jews didn't make it. Excuse me? The Jews followed the law, okay? All right. What else? Why did the Gentiles make it? Why did the Gentiles attain into righteousness? Excuse me? Faith, okay, absolutely, okay? That the Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness attain righteousness. The righteousness that is by faith, okay? But the Jews pursued it by law, as Carrie said. Well, the passage says further that they pursued it by works, okay? What a tremendous teaching for you and I, relating to what we're studying in this entire series. We must not make the same mistake, brethren, as the Jews. We must not pursue our righteousness, our justification by works. Are we to be involved in good works? Absolutely. But we do not attain our righteousness that way, okay? The Jews had the law. The Gentiles did not have a formal covenant with God, but some among the Gentiles succeeded because they trusted God. Man sometimes tends to trust in himself, and that's what I think we just read back in Habakkuk. But we must not. Okay? We must trust in another. We must have faith in another, okay? The passage continues. The Jews stumbled over a stone. What was that stone? It says, the Jews, in verse 32, they stumbled over the stumbling stone. What's that stone? Yeah, Jesus. They stumbled over the Christ, okay? We must not stumble over that stone. That is, we must be clothed in the righteousness of Jesus Christ, as we've covered over the last couple of weeks. The lesson is this, I think. If you have a law system, what the Jews had, and you are satisfied with law righteousness, then Jesus becomes unnecessary. Self-righteousness and law righteousness stand opposed to the righteousness which is of God by faith. And I think we need to recognize these are not neutral terms without meaning and consequence. These passages have consequence, brother. They're teaching us something. They're teaching us that it is our faith that leads to righteousness, okay? The righteousness which is of God by faith. We must not be ignorant of God's righteousness and cleave to our own righteousness. This can be, again, a serious spiritual mistake. But Paul continues here. I'm not sure we're going to have time to finish this. We might have to come back up. All right, 5 minutes. Man, this is interesting, verses 5 through 7, okay? Maybe we can do a little bit of it and maybe pick up again here next week. For Moses writes that the righteousness is based on the law, that the person who performs them will live by them. But the righteousness based on faith speaks as follows. Do not say in your heart, who will go into heaven, that is to bring Christ down, or who will descend into the abyss, that is to bring Christ up from the dead, okay? Here with clarity, Paul contrasts the righteousness of the law and the righteousness of faith. What is the answer to Paul's questions? What is the answer to Paul's questions? Who will go up into heaven to bring Christ down? What are the answers to that? What's the answer to that question? Who will go up into heaven to bring Christ down? All right, hang on, Tammy. I'm going to pick on you. You ready? Okay? All right. No, she's not ready, but she'll be okay. Tammy, did you go into heaven to bring Christ down? How about you, Brian? Did you go into heaven to bring Christ down? How about you, Rolf? Did you go into heaven to bring Christ down? All right. Who went into heaven to bring Christ down? None of us, brethren. That's the point. Let's see who else I can pick on. Tim, did you go into the grave to bring Christ up? No. How about you, Margaret? Did you go into the grave to bring Christ up? No, ma'am, you didn't. Okay. How about you, Janice? Did you do that? All right. Who did that? None of us. And that's the point. We can't do that. Okay? All right. It's only God that could do that. And it was only God to do that. Okay? It is God who accomplished that. It is Christ who did these things. Paul is writing here an absurdity. He's using an absurdity to teach us something. You know, in a lot of teaching can be done by exaggerations or by absurdity, by quoting something that makes no sense. And you kind of use something that makes no sense to make the point, okay? Again, he's using absurdity to teach us something here about our justification, about our redemption. It is that you and I can't accomplish it. It is that we must depend upon another. It is that we must depend upon our God. It is that we must depend upon Christ. Another passage that makes it abundantly clear. I'm going to say again, in a lot of this study, we have kind of, in some ways, repeated the same concept over and over again. The concept that we cannot earn our justification or our salvation or our redemption by merit or by works or by our accomplishing it. But I would like for you to notice and remember, if you will, the number of different passages we have read at different points in the New Testament and the Old Testament that teach that. If there are that many passages, different passages written by different writers that teach that, I'm going to say to you again, it seems to me that's something we must pay attention to. That's something we must learn, okay? I could stand here right now and apologize to you for teaching that lesson or saying to you that lesson over and over again over however long this has been. I know it's been a long study. 4 months or so we've been at this, okay? But I'm not going to apologize to you for that because I must know that, okay, if I'm going to understand the basis and the grounds for my justification, for my redemption, for how I get to heaven. And I'm going to submit to you, brethren, that you must understand that too, okay? The righteousness which is of faith, which is what we're talking about this morning, we'll finish talking about next Sunday. The righteousness which is of faith, trust in what the Lord has done for us. That's what the righteousness based on faith speaks. Remember, that's what we read? The righteousness based upon faith speaks. It says something. It tells us something. Okay? It is Christ that came down from heaven and rose from the dead for our justification. We had nothing to do with that. We must understand that. All right, I'm going to stop right there. But we will go on next Sunday, pick up with this passage. And it's very interesting that Paul continues in this passage, however, and says there's something we must do. We must do to take hold of all of these things that are offered to us by our God through Jesus Christ and through his atoning sacrifice. It's very interesting in this same passage, in the latter part of the passage we just read, that Paul addresses some of those things that we must do, not to earn it, but to take hold of the free gift that is offered to us. And we'll discuss that next Sunday. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.